Let's get into some football here. Johnny Mack is with us. He's got to follow the poop jokes. All right. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's going on, John?
Well, if you look at some of my Twitter following, I'm surprised I'm not a big part of that poop segment.
I don't know that you've been hearing any of the – is Terrell Owens doing something that he's on, like, the media tour?
Well, he's going in the Hall of Fame. I don't know. Terrell is a weird cat. He still wants to play. So
exactly.
Maybe him and Kurt Warner can get together.
Well, he has suggested that he wants to play. He thinks he can help the Giants out. I've heard him say on a wrestling podcast that he thinks he can help the Falcons out. He also has mentioned in multiple places about Jason Garrett basically pushing Wade Phillips out the door. He's still heated that they've essentially back in 2009 blamed him for a lot of the problems, and then his follow-up was 9 years later they're still having the same problems. Today he said he wondered why Jason Garrett hasn't been fired. Who knew that the hatred ran so deep with the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, who knew the hatred ran so deep with Terrell Owens? I mean, that's been the issue throughout his career, is sort of dividing locker rooms. He's probably right with Jason Garrett. I mean, let's be honest. There's if you look at what's gone on in Dallas over the years and going all the way back to when Jimmy Johnson was there and they had their divorce because Jerry Jones got a little tipsy at a bar and was upset that Jimmy got all the credit for building those teams. And then he went to Bill Parcells, who's obviously a very headstrong personality. He didn't like that, and he settled on a guy who does what he tells him to do, and that's what Jerry wants. So that's why Jason Garrett continues to have a job.
Right.
That's the reality of it.
Yeah, he suggested, and he was actually asked in the podcast that I was listening to, did he enjoy his time in Philly or Dallas? Now, not really understanding how deep, everything was happening down in Dallas. He was there for 3 seasons and the whole he's my quarterback, yada, yada. And then what happened in Philadelphia, you would assume that his memories of Philly probably weren't very fond. Now, he said that Philly he enjoyed much more, and that he gave a ton of credit to Andy Reid, called him like an offensive genius, and that he just doesn't have the right personnel, that his type of receiver is, obviously Owens, and he needs a McNabb with a strong arm to really work. But he was very fond of his time in Philadelphia and really said we were poised to do big things there, and obviously it didn't work out.
Yeah, I mean, his issues here had more to do with Donovan than anything else. Obviously, the 1 year was a tremendous success. It was a far better team than he was ever on in Dallas, so that's part of it. And then remember, I think people forget he signed a very team-friendly deal to get here originally, and then when he produced at the level he did, came back injured to play in the Super Bowl, played so well. He wanted to be rewarded for it, and obviously the Eagles took a different tack, and it went off the rails fairly quickly. Nobody's ever denied his talent. I mean, the guy is a phenomenal football player, but hey, history is history for a reason. You don't have to be a revisionist to look at it and say that he's had a lot of issues in more than one city. So it's always something with T.O.
Sure is.
Whether it's a teammate, whether it's a coach, it's always coming up. It's always something.
Well, T.O. Always entertaining, making the rounds, had some interesting things to say this week. How about the Browns? Look like they're going to be this year's Hard Knocks team, which I'll ask you, John, what makes them interesting and appealing?
Well, I think every NFL team is kind of interesting when you take an inside look. So I think that kind of takes care of itself. But if you look at the Browns and the fact that they have so much going on, the fact that they're coming off an 0-16 season, the fact that Hugh Jackson's the head coach who may be a lame duck, may not, doesn't seem to have a lot of power now with John Dorsey. And obviously you have the number 1 overall pick. So take your pick. There's a ton of storylines around the Cleveland Browns, but as I said, that format and that kind of show is always interesting because there's always at least 3 or 4 people in every NFL city that people are going to find entertaining. The beauty of that show is they find them, they kind of build a narrative around it. So it's almost a can't miss type show, no matter what team they pick.
Now, John, they had the Madden jinx when players would appear on the NFL video game. Is there a Hard Knocks jinx? Are you buying into that?
No, I think, the thing with the rules that they have, because not a lot, let's be honest, you see most of the coaches in this league, and they don't want the cameras around. That's just the reality. They're probably overreacting. Everybody who was, I just saw a tweet from John McMullen, who covers the Houston Texans, and when they were on Hard Knocks, and he said how professional the camera crew is. You don't even know they're there. I think people overreact to it. They don't want to be involved, so the NFL has had to set up this sort of system where teams can be chosen because if nobody volunteers, and it generally has to do with not making the playoffs and not being very good. So I don't know if that's a jinx. I think the jinx is making bad personnel decisions.
Ravens, Broncos, Chargers, 49ers, and Washington, along with the Browns, were the 6 teams that were being considered. Which of those teams would you have rather seen other than the Browns?
Weren't the Eagles also considered, because they have not been on there yet? And I thought after, 3 years or something, that if you haven't been on, that or if you're a non-playoff, what's the stipulation again?
Yeah, there's a lot of, you got to be a non-playoff team. You have to have not been on for a number of years. I don't know the exact, but there's a bunch of different stipulations. And obviously it's designed because there are no teams that are willing to step up. I mean, they do it for a reason. And the reason, as I mentioned, that teams aren't willing to step up is the fact that most coaches don't want the cameras around. And we know from covering this league on a daily basis, and the Eagles are a perfect example of this, it's like state secrets. It's like they're running the CIA over there. It's football, but a lot of times they put more importance on the secretive aspect to it than there needs to be. But it's been very successful for the NFL, and that's why they have to force teams to go on it, because they don't want to get rid of the show.
Right, compel a team to appear on the show for the marketing. It's a key marketing tool for the NFL. I've got the criteria up, John, and they call it the right to refuse. So they say the teams that have the right to refuse are teams that have either A, already done the show once in the last 10 years, teams that have a new head coach, teams that have been to the playoffs in the last 2 years. So I think at one point they had 26 of the 32 teams that then fit into one of those categories. That's why they ended up with the 6 that could have been forced. And then, of course, now they've ultimately decided on the Browns. There wasn't another team that you didn't want to see the Redskins exposed?
Well, the Redskins are always interesting. I think from a perspective of just being entertained, you look for dysfunction. So the Redskins are always at the top of the list. Dallas, we just mentioned, if they could, and obviously with their national popularity, and they've been on it before, but they would always be interesting just because they're so dysfunctional. And for that reason, I think the Browns are interesting as they make another regime change to John Dorsey, it's just the latest, and another quarterback, just the latest. So it always tends to be, if you're a well-oiled machine, you're not that interesting. But if you're a train wreck, everybody's interested.
Do you want to rank the dysfunctionality of the 6 teams? Browns, Ravens, Broncos, Chargers, Niners, and Washington?
Well, certainly the Ravens don't have as much dysfunction. The Broncos don't have much dysfunction. Remember, if you're bad, obviously the Broncos have had some issues at the quarterback position, significant issues since Peyton Manning retired, but it's not a dysfunctional organization. Dysfunctional organizations generally start at the top, and it's ownership, and it's Jerry Jones, it's Daniel Snyder, it's Jimmy Haslam, it's people like that.
Yeah. John McMullen's with us here, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, you can read all his NFL offseason news at GetMoreSports.com. And we see that the Eagles are invited to the White House on June the 5th. Will this be a
how many will show
full
up?
team, half a team, no team?
Well, I think the majority of the team will be there. Certain guys, Jenkins has already said he would not go, but he tempered that back. But I think he's doubling down that. Chris Long has said he will not go. Brandon Graham has said he will not go. Torrey Smith, who's no longer with the team but would be invited, said he would not go. But I expect the majority of the team will be there. Remember, traditionally, this is a nonpartisan event. It's not supposed to be political. It's a tradition, no matter who's in the White House. And I think sometimes people need to just take a step back and realize that.
John, before we get too far away from NFL news, the league is considering a rule that would have the referees consult with the replay office before ejecting a player from the game. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good rule because that can impact the game. If you eject a player, there were a couple instances last season where guys were ejected for throwing punches, and then you look at the replay and they really didn't throw punches. So if they can look at that and correct it and say the guy's not getting ejected, that's a good thing. So I think when you're doing something that serious that could have an impact on the game, I think it's good to have that sort of second level where you can look at it and perhaps correct it if you got it wrong.
All right, Johnny Mac, we'll have more NFL. Of course, we are certainly getting closer. The Eagles, as you mentioned on yesterday's show, the OTAs, mini camps start on Monday. The media will be there on Tuesday, so we'll have plenty more on the world champion Philadelphia Eagles next week. Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys.